And you are live.
It's 6 o'clock. Good evening and welcome to the Monday, March 1st, 2021 Dublin City Council work session. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask Jenny, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Ludo.
Here.
Mr. Reiner.
Here. Here.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms.
Here.
Vice Mayor DeRosa.
Here.
Ms. Fox.
Here.
Mr. Keeler.
Here.
Great, thank you. And Homer is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So Homer, invite.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Homer. Okay, I believe we're going to have an introduction from Mr. McDaniel on our topics for this evening and how we proceed. Introductions for those that are joining us. So, welcome.
Great, thanks. Thank you. Good evening, members of council. Thanks for your time tonight in having a work session. I think, as you all know, we're trying to schedule a series of work sessions throughout the year, as well as council subcommittees, to try to keep us all on track here with a lot of your council goals and activities that you are all working on. Tonight, and it's hard to believe we're already closing in on the first quarter of this year, being in March. And here we are with a work session trying to get caught up. So wanted to put a couple of your council goals on for tonight to give you updates. One is really a discussion kind of closing out an update on the economic development strategy, which is one of your key council goals. Colleen Gilger, along with Deb Cummins and Mr. Simpkins is here tonight. Joe Simpkins is here tonight to speak to that. And I'll let Colleen lead on that when the time comes. Second, we'll have an update on your most connected goal. And we have Doug McAuliffe and Greg Dunn on to talk about that. I might chime in on occasion, but I'll let Doug kind of kick that off and take the lead on it. Then the last item I put in, I hope you don't mind, because we're going to be closing here, as you know, pretty soon on the properties on North Riverview Street. And I know that I thought it might be a good opportunity for Megan to kind of check in with you. And I think we've had some discussion about an advisory committee and what that might be comprised of. So I wanted her to touch base with all of council to get a little bit of initial direction or thoughts just from you all before we embark on that process. And I thought I'd take advantage of tonight's meeting to just try to get that a little bit of input from you. We don't have to have all the answers tonight. That's what your advisory committee is going to do. And but she'll lay that out for you when she presents a little bit later. So with that, thank you very much and appreciate your time tonight. And with that, I'll hand it over to Colleen. Thank you.
Good evening, members of council. Before we get started, I know, like Dana just said, there's a lot on your agenda, so we are time limiting this presentation to 30 minutes or less. Just wanted to let you know that on the front end. We adopted our strategic plan in late 2019. The data set that we used for formulating that plan was from 2010 through 2017. Knowing that each fall we would have access to the previous year's data, we have Techonomy under contract where annually they will be giving us a data set update based on the original numbers that we used in the plan. So in fall of 2020, we received access to 2018 and 19 data sets. So tonight, you've received a huge report in your packet, but we've chosen about a dozen of what we believe are the most important slides to discuss in that data set to give you an update, a 2-year update on the data from the original plan. And like I said, we will be back either late in the year or early in the following year with data updates annually, which also could result in a change to strategy if the data would ever take a dramatic pivot. So with that, I'm going to introduce Deborah Cummings, who you know from our year-long strategic plan update, and I'm going to hand it over to her. She and her colleague Joe Simpkins can answer any questions as well. So Deborah, I will allow you to take control.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and it's a pleasure to be before all of you this evening again. I want to make sure, are you able to see the March 1st presentation on your screen? And hopefully it is the single slide and not the presenter's view. Perfect. So as Colleen indicated, she had shared with you the data update that we had provided in the late fall of 2020. We followed the same methodology that we had vetted with all of you as we developed the 2019 strategy throughout 2018 and into 2019. It uses a variety of data sources, but just as a quick reminder, the three significant data sources that we pull the vast majority of the data from is both the in-plan CEW data at the zip code and level data, the MZ that gets us cities and neighborhoods, and then the microfirm database called the BDRC YTS data. All of these data sources have their pros and they all have slight imperfections. It's why we utilize all three to make sure that we're able to triangulate and try to get the most accurate data possible. As Colleen indicated, in early fourth quarter of 2020, these three national data sets are updated. The 2018 data had been out, but the 2019 data at that time became available. So we went through all of the data sets that we had initially developed, the City of Dublin's Economic Development Strategic Plan with all of you on. So that data now was provided to you in about a 90-slide deck in late fall, I think probably early December. And I think that Colleen shared it with you again. We have summarized those 90 slides down to about 12 for this evening, focused on kind of 4 key updates. First of all, to share with you kind of the greater Columbus industry cluster movement over the last 2 years. Then diving deeper into what's been going on in Dublin's economy, both from its industry cluster and business dynamics, but also in comparison to the regional benchmarks that have been set during the strategic planning process, and also an update on the workforce and talent indicators. And then we'll end our update talking a little bit about Dublin's innovation activity over that 2-year time period, and then the socioeconomic and quality of place indicators. What I'd like to simply say kind of up front is that obviously none of this data includes 2020. That data will not be available until end of third, beginning of fourth quarter of this coming year. Obviously, we all know that the economy has changed and shifted. It will be interesting for all of us to be able to vet that data together, but this data is through 2019, so it is pre-COVID. Saying that then, some of this data that we wanted to share with you that we felt was most important for you all to be able to discuss this evening and to answer any questions. And I will just say up front that if there's a particular slide that I did not choose to share out of the 90 some slide packet, we are here to discuss anything you would like, but we wanted to be able to provide this overview. So typically industry clusters do not change drastically in a short period of time, and certainly during an economic growth period, the greater Columbus Regional Industry Cluster trends remained relatively unchanged, and that is what we would expect. What I will point out is that overall there were some clusters that experienced slower growth levels. This is going to be mirrored throughout the benchmarks as well as in Dublin. Part of that was just simply as the economy kind of went through the expansion period post the Great Recession and kind of hit some all-time highs in the 2015, 2016, 2017 period. It's not that overall growth ended, growth continued, but the rate of growth began to slow. A few notable exceptions in the greater Columbus region included the finance and insurance. The slowdown was finance and insurance, business services, and R&D and engineering, which I think will be interesting to track because certainly with the growth and some of the investments at Ohio State, we would expect that potentially to turn around, but at least during this 2-year time window, it did slow. However, Industry clusters that did continue to grow and grow actually significantly in comparison to the US included corporate headquarters and a lot of the freight and transportation and distribution and logistics. And certainly as you go across the region, seemingly on both sides of 70 as well as elsewhere, you do continue to see that boom and growth. More interesting though, and where we're going to spend the majority of the time that we have with you, is talking about what was happening in Dublin during the same 2-year time period. And overall, Dublin's employment, and that's what this slide is focused on, continued to increase since 2017, adding to a level of about 70,000 jobs by 2019. And again, similar to the greater Columbus area, the growth rates began to plateau, and you see that in 2018 and 2019. But I think very important for the city and a positive trend is that the regional clusters that we're focused on actually increased to 53% of total Dublin employment by 2019 relative to 46% in 2017. So while the overall rate of growth started to plateau a bit, where there was growth were these important industry clusters that we know are going to drive economic growth for the city. I did want to highlight, however, in case you missed it, it is interesting that the previous slide was focused on employment growth. This slide is looking purely at the number of establishments, and all establishments are created equal here, whether it's employee of 5 or employee of 5,000. And here you actually see something where the Dublin establishment growth not only plateaued since 2017, but actually decreased just slightly, ever so slightly, at about 3%, while actually in Columbus, number of establishments continued to increase. I think it's way too early to say whether this is a true inflection point or just a blip in time, but I do think it's something that we want to track and look at if it's starting to point to either local saturation or changing of business conditions. So it's certainly something, again, when you're looking at this data and not a lot has changed, this is something certainly to keep in mind as we look at out years going forward. When we dig down into the specific Dublin industry cluster trends, again, similar to Columbus, they remain largely unchanged. Industry cluster specializations and IT and computer services and corporate headquarters and managing offices and finance and insurance, R&D and engineering services all remained strengths. Some of them had a decline in employment growth levels. In IT and computer services, for one, the decline in R&D and engineering services was a bit larger, but again, from a smaller base, so part of it's just how division works. But we also saw significant positive shifts in employment growth, both in medical biosciences and healthcare provider services, as well as corporate HQ and managing offices, all of which were very positive in this 2-year window. As we look at benchmark comparisons, what we see then is that Dublin actually outperformed and continues to outperform the vast majority of the benchmark regions. There's 11 benchmarks, and other than downtown Columbus, and if you'll remember, we define each of these by their zip codes, Dublin had an overall share of Columbus MSA employment that was larger than all of the other benchmarks. And I think more importantly, had while slightly declined in terms of the overall growth rate, its rate of decline was actually less than the vast majority of the other benchmarks. So I think it puts it in good stead when you're looking across the region and at some of these areas that we were considering to be kind of high growth buzz communities throughout central Ohio. Certainly what the data continues to point to is that access to highly skilled talent continues to be a comparative advantage for Dublin. I know that we may have a conversation about this when you get into questions and what does the impact of COVID mean, particularly as people work from home. But I think what continues to be critical is that the companies within Dublin employ a significantly higher proportion of highly skilled workforce, generally requiring a bachelor's degree or higher, both relative to the greater Columbus region, the nation, and the state. 35% of the overall employment in 2019. So the access to talent is critical for Dublin's companies, but it also provides a comparative advantage that they're able to access that talent. High demand occupations in the region between 2017 and 2019 didn't particularly change from the earlier period, but certainly high skilled segments of the employment included management occupations, business and financial analysts, and the IT services, as well as education workers. Middle skilled segment included sales and business support and healthcare workers. And then some of the lower skilled segments included various administrative, hospitality, and service industries. The bottom line being that STEM workers in Dublin's employment base remain very highly concentrated, both in computing and IT occupations. And this reinforces a lot of what we learned during the strategic planning process of Dublin's comparative advantage and the ability and importance of retaining and growing this traded sector enabled workforce into the future to support Dublin's companies. The last, or the third segment then that we looked at was Dublin's industrial innovation and activity summary. Again, over a 2-year window, and we actually even looked into the second quarter of 2020 simply because the data was available, and you know, these aren't huge data trend sets, but we continue to see something similar to what we were seeing during the strategic planning process, which is that certainly innovation is important to the region, but it is spread across many different companies with a lot of locally assigned patents distributed across numerous technology areas, although certainly medical technologies, chemicals, and IT and analytics continues to be important. Dublin overall received about companies in Dublin, 6 specific companies in Dublin received a little over 21 million in venture funding. You know, it's a little hard to say again, because these deals very much, you know, you have a large A or B round, you know, followed by then the spend down. It's hard to look at this short a time window to say whether that's positive, negative. You know, what I'll say is it just continues the trend that companies in the Dublin area continue to receive venture financing to help their growth and scalability, and companies, 5 Dublin companies continue to then also seek the non-dilutive capital from the federal government through SBIR awards, which again is a good strong source of R&D funding to a tune of about $3 million since 2018. The final area then that we updated was Dublin socioeconomic and quality of place indicators. What I'll say is that if industry clusters do not change on an annual basis very much, socioeconomic and quality of place indicators probably change even less unless something drastic happened. So again, we'll look at 2020 data. But overall, Dublin continues to have a growing, highly educated population. It remains a key commuter workforce destination for the greater Columbus region, which helps its economy continue to remain vibrant. Obviously, we're all interested in understanding how the work from home impacted 2020 and what it will look like going into the future, both positive to Dublin as well as negative as the rest of the nation as well. The city does continue to reflect a high quality of place through its higher income levels, home values, and desirable school quality. I know you all are aware, all of us who live in Central Ohio recognize kind of the booming, even through this 2020 COVID pandemic, you know, housing market is going insane. It's, you know, just driving housing prices up even higher throughout numerous communities, including Dublin. You know, we'll note again, as we did in 2018, that some of the high wealth and lower affordability demonstrated in these indicators may have an unintended effect of crowding out future workforce attraction and retention. And it's just something that we'll continue on to look at, particularly as IT and other skills are critical to the growth of the Dublin economy. But overall, most of the high-level quality of place indicators reflected only very minor changes from the levels documented in the economic development strategy and continued to show very well against all of the benchmarks that it was compared to. So when we look at the key facets of Dublin's 2019 economic development strategy, we believe that all of them remain critical to maintaining Dublin's economic prosperity. We don't feel necessarily that anything needs to change going forward in terms of the data, in terms of what the data can point to. But again, we all know what we have gone through in 2020 collectively as a community and as a society. We know that as businesses were hit hard, being able to continue to streamline development processes, to be able to create a very business-friendly environment that is responsive to changing industrial needs and Lord knows that we had a lot of change and needs over this past year. The ability to nurture growth in targeted industry sectors. These are all going to continue to be critical, as well as certainly fostering and sustaining our public-private partnerships. I think what's a little bit more unknown, and I do not have a crystal ball in terms of what the commercial real estate market will do coming into 2021 and beyond. What I will say, though, and I think is critical and where the strategy is focused, is that having spaces that are high quality and being able to retrofit some of the older spaces will only continue to be important. If there is a surplus on the market, it will be the older spaces that will be hardest to lease and rent, and therefore continuing to make sure that the commercial real estate is up to par and it has high standards will be critical for any community growth to continue throughout Central Ohio and the nation. So with that, hopefully I hit the timing well, and we will use the remaining time to answer any questions that you may have.
Deborah, I had a couple questions, please.
Great.
I don't remember this, and I looked through the report. Do we know, do we have a number for sort of total GDP for the Columbus region and for Dublin per se?
So I'm also
Data.
Yeah, so my colleague Joe Simpkins is on the line, and it's hard for me to have this up and be able to look at the old data. You can certainly develop, at that point, it's actually GRP, gross regional product, and we certainly have, I don't remember if it made it into the report or not, but Joe, can you look?
No, we did not develop that for the previous report or for this one. And it is something we have access to. It's just not something that we ended up looking at for either.
The reason I asked that is I was thinking that's sort of my second question, and that is, you know what, as you said, we're going to look at data coming out of what it was the craziest year, if we can call it that we've all seen in terms of this. I'd be curious to know what types of data folks are asking you to collect and what we think we might in terms of maybe some sort of different data that can help us. But one of the things that came to my mind is understanding sort of this GDP equivalent for our region, and where it was, what happened to it, and maybe why that happened to it, and what recovery we might see, because we may see the same number of employees and employers, but that number may be particularly interesting at this time. I don't know what your thoughts on that. And then the second question, what kind of data might you provide, or what are other companies asking for? And thank you for this work.
No, thank you. And no, I certainly think, and we would be happy to add to the analysis and go back in time so we can look at trend lines to create the equivalent of a GDP. And I think that is trending with some of the things that we are looking at more and more, which is starting to look more at productivity measures, recognizing that as work continues to change, and this is now a much broader discussion and may or may not be relevant to a micro region like Dublin, but certainly as we're looking at state economies and the advent of artificial intelligence and continued automation, while employment continues to be critical, we know that employment doesn't always capture exactly what's happening within the economy. And so looking more at some productivity measures is something that we're doing more and more of, and that may be something that we want to look at within Dublin's economy to the extent that we can as well.
Great, thank you.
Deborah, I have a question for you. I'm looking back at the 2 years ago when we had the strength and weaknesses assessment and all that. And of course, we've been through the pandemic now. And most of the things that businesses looked at that they said were our strengths still exist today, such as having highly educated workforce, a quality of life. Really, they're all pretty similar. But I wonder, now that we've been through the pandemic, are any of those strengths maybe more important than they even were before, such as quality of life, or creating opportunities for higher education within a community, since we're now looking at workforces that we really want to live here instead of just commute here. Could you address maybe some of those questions?
So what I'll say is, unfortunately, I wish I had a crystal ball because it would make my life, I would be even a better consultant. But I do think that some of those changing, or let me put it this way, I don't think we know yet how shifting demographics will or won't impact. I saw, and I'm sure you all did as well, there was an article in the Dispatch, I don't remember now over the weekend or if it was Friday, but it was, continued number of apartments and condos being built, and they expect even more of a flood into the downtown area. And I have to say that just simply as a human who's lived through COVID, I thought, that seems counterintuitive to me. That doesn't seem to be what I would think would be happening, and certainly isn't what is happening in New York City and elsewhere. And so, Councilwoman Fox, I think it's just a little too early for us to tell if there are going to be long-term impacts of COVID on how businesses do business. And what I mean by that is, how many businesses are going to now shift to a work from home model versus once we can get through the pandemic and get vaccinated, bringing everyone back into buildings again together. And quite honestly, I think it's very much going to depend on the industry sector. So I think that the cluster strategy is going to continue to be incredibly important because I think different industry clusters are going to react differently to the pandemic. Some, I think, will come back to the original model of how we were doing business in 2019 because that's their most efficient and productive way to do it. I do think other industry sectors, potentially primarily the IT, although others as well, may very much. I mean, to have the overhead of bricks and mortar, especially if they don't currently own their buildings, may be something that they realize is an overhead expense that they don't need and people can work from wherever. And that, I think, will be a very interesting, we've all read articles on the nomadic life of millennials and others who now are working wherever and living, we're not talking even within a region, we're talking now anywhere within the United States. So I think that those are things that we want to look at, we want to track, we want to understand, but it's a little too early to know whether the Cardinal Healths of the world are going to bring everyone back or if a large percentage of their workforce is going to be allowed to work from elsewhere. And I think these are things that we want to be, and I know that the Economic Development Department is talking with and trying to understand, the decisions that companies are going to be making.
And I'll follow up too with the Connected Dublin initiatives that we're undertaking right now are critically important because depending on what happens with office, right? I think, like Deb said, some will come back, some won't. But if there is a shift to working from home to make the residential stock in Dublin as competitive as possible by bringing more technology to residential areas, that's only going to benefit us. So whereas before we spent so much time focusing on how we planned where our Class A offices, would go because of income tax, I think we also need to shift and look at how income tax comes in through residential properties from people working from home and why we need to focus on technology.
And I'll just quickly add that I think the millennials are aging. And I just was with a millennial this weekend who loved being downtown, but now is getting to a point, wants to settle down and cannot find affordable housing in a community that has the urban environment. They're looking Marion Village, German Village, all of these are unaffordable. We have the opportunity to create urban hubs and hopefully create affordable housing that would accommodate them.
Debbie, I have a philosophical question piggybacking on Jane's comments. 30 years ago, we tried to create corporate housing to draw the corporate CEOs in so that they would fill up our office parks. Now, the thought came up, and Colleen had mentioned this in a previous meeting, that it would be great to create the kind of housing that draws in the IT people to fill up these offices, which we probably don't have in a large quantity, but through conservation design and other techniques, we could probably create some really nice communities for these people. What do you think about that idea of creating housing for the workers who are going to fill up these offices? Is that the trend that we're heading towards or should be looking towards? Because these CEOs are now looking for hiring employees in numbers in areas as to avail them and help their businesses grow. So what do you think about that philosophy? I'm just curious.
No, and we have long espoused that talent actually is now the number one competitive advantage that a region has, where if you go back 50 years, it was natural resources and transportation. And transportation, don't get me wrong, is still critical for some industry clusters, but across all industry clusters, access to talent. And again, pre-COVID, when we were looking at unemployment rates in the 2019 timeframe and talking with companies, that's all anyone spoke about was, how do I get access to the skilled talent that I need? The unemployment rates are so low. And so as they looked at certainly company expansion, but even as regions look to be able to attract companies or to retain them, the ability to show that they had the talent that was required is the number one comparative advantage. And how do you have that talent? You provide the quality of place, the quality of life, but also the livability that they can be. Now, we talked a lot about, and so I want to be clear, Dublin is a commuting community, and you built yourself that way, and that's to be commendable, because a lot of our suburbs are the exact opposite, that they're bedroom communities but don't have a lot of industry for people to work in. So I think having, it's not that you're going to be able to have every single person who works in Dublin live in Dublin, but certainly if you're only thinking about CEO housing versus workforce housing, I think you're selling yourself short, because people do want, this was part of what we looked at in the 2019 report, the change in trends of people wanting to be able to be closer to where they're working, to be able to have more of a live, work, play environment. All those trends, again, unless COVID has just completely disrupted everything, I don't think that it has. I think those trends are going to continue, and therefore having housing stock that meets those needs will continue to be important.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I had another one if others don't, but I'll defer. Oh, okay, quick question. Back to the access to talent, now that not just millennials are being nomads, I think we're seeing that at all ages and generations, right? What does that change here when we talk about access to talent? Because now what I'm hearing is, and seeing from some people that I know, folks are saying you can work anywhere in the world, and now they're hiring anywhere in the world. So when we talk about building the right housing, it's for whom? It's an interesting question. For whom? What is your thought on that?
So again, I don't mean to say that I'm an expert in housing, because I am not, but this is what I will say is there going to be a small percentage of individuals who feel that they can pick up and live anywhere and everywhere, and I'm not going to even pick on Dublin. Will Ohio be the attractor of those individuals? I'm a lifelong resident of Ohio, and I choose to live here, and I'm still going to say no, probably not. Those people are looking to live in the mountains, at the beach, in foreign countries, on an island, wherever it may be. It's not in Ohio. So is there going to potentially be, that change in workforce? Yes. But what I will argue is that anyone, and it's obviously not everyone in the population, but anyone who has children needs to educate them, and they're going to want to have a home base, and school systems and quality of life is going to continue to be critical to them. People who have children who then grow up who have children are going to want to be near those children. And so you're always going to have that kind of older generation that says, I want to be near my family, or the kids coming back to them. So yes, are we going to have that sense of the population who maybe feels that they're even less rooted than they ever were before? Certainly, but I believe it's going to be a small percentage of the population, not the vast majority.
I think when you also look at cost of living in Ohio versus other states, we're definitely more affordable. Even though we have a housing shortage in central Ohio, housing costs here are still much less than they are in the mountains and the beaches and on islands. So we could use that to our advantage as well. So really it's going to come down to, what kind of quality we can offer and at what price point. And that's how we stay competitive.
And I would just add to what Deb said, I think absolutely we don't have the crystal ball yet to see how a lot of the post-COVID stuff is going to shake out. However, I think there are a lot of early studies coming out from folks that have shown that regardless of whether they go back to the office or stay remote, the pandemic has forced young talent and as you said, aging millennials. I will count myself. I'll out myself as an aging millennial. And it has forced those markets to reevaluate their purchasing choices with respect to real estate, and has also put a lot of folks in the frame of mind of they are, instead of delaying, a housing purchase, they actually are going to make that purchase sooner because they want to be ready for another future situation where this might happen again, or give themselves the flexibility to work remotely. So I think either way, whether those people are going back to work or staying remote, there's not a downside to having some urgency about capturing a share of that market who's actually in the wake of this going to be looking to sort of make a more immediate lifestyle decision that's going to probably be a housing investment of some kind. I will also add for the record that I only recently bought a house in Dublin, and it was very competitive. So more housing stock kind of automatically puts you in a better place than a lot of other communities around the region as well. Anecdotally, I can tell you that for sure. So.
Thank you.
I wanted to make a quick ask of Colleen. The three circles there that Deborah showed, one of them was streamlining the permitting process or the process. And we talk a lot about housing, it becomes a very obvious need here. But we really haven't talked much about the streamlining of the processes. And I honestly think, and after sitting on planning and zoning and going through the last 3 years of angst at times, I do wonder if we shouldn't actually run some sort of a lean program on our processes. Because I think that I'm looking at even Columbus, looking at some of their processes, but also they're looking at their zoning for housing in single family areas. I think these are the two things that we probably should put a little energy towards. I think it would help you and your department for economic development. I think it would clarify some things for planning and our commissions, and also give council an opportunity to see what it might look like if we had some different kind of streamlined processes. What could we catch if we throw the hook out, right? So I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what you have to say, Colleen, and then also about the all single family zoning we have there. So that's for another conversation, but at least on this streamlining of the processes, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think we can definitely take a look at it. I know that was something that we have a couple staff members right now that, in addition to doing the cost study, when we were looking at the cost to develop in Dublin versus some of our regional competitors, it is sort of taking that next step of how long does it take to get through individual processes to build a building in Dublin versus building it, in New Albany or Columbus. So I know as that study progresses, there's also going to be some interviews done with developers who developed in Dublin and other places to get more of that anecdotal, what were some of the hurdles or what was the most difficult part of the process for you. So I know that we do have some of that studying underway. But I know that we have a lot of talented black belts on staff who love to lean a process. So I definitely think that it's a project that we could undertake here. Sure.
Thank you.
Colleen, sorry. Colleen, I have a question. I've driven through neighboring communities when much development has happened pretty quickly. And truthfully, it isn't very good. There's a lot of really good development happening. And so processes, we can tell developers, and we know what they're going to tell us. They're going to tell us they want to build something faster and cheaper and more dense and with, progressive materials and fill in the blank, right? So how do we not, I feel like we're competing fairly well right now with stringent standards. I think we could compete a lot more faster, but I'm wondering at what cost, right? What associated costs, what soft costs, if you will. You see the winners and losers on these slides. I don't know if it can be captured in a year of who's winning and losing. This is like an inning of a baseball game in my mind. This is not. Some of these slides, I mean, they're fantastic. I'm not criticizing the data at all. I'm just wanting us to kind of check ourselves at the door and say, what are we really after? Are we after winning the next game, or are we doing a game? And that means quality of life, and that means schools, and that means enduring architecture with enduring materials. And I don't want to get caught up in this chasing our tail kind of thing, because I don't know that that's winning.
Right. I think, I'd love to see some new developers come into town and want to try new product here that maybe isn't in the region already, or different types of architecture. So I think there are certainly ways that we can work with the development community that hasn't developed here traditionally, and see why they haven't, and what it would take to maybe get them to come in and try a project or two here. But you're right. We're not going to be lowering standards or changing. Dublin looks and feels a certain way on purpose, and I don't see us deviating from that.
Although I think that's the temptation, just to interrupt, I think that's the temptation, right? Like, they're going to tell us, well, if you lower your standards and you lower all of this, then we can build the housing that you need.
Right. I think we need to pick and choose. Is it lowering a standard on a material, or is it lowering, giving a better density to someone, but keeping them at quality materials, at the higher quality materials? I think we can maybe do some picking and choosing and still get a great product without having to give away on every standard that we have. But there are definitely some newer products out there that we could take a look at and talk to those developers and find out why they haven't brought it to Dublin, or if they would be interested in bringing it to Dublin. I do know that, looking at the office side, not residential, the Bridge Park model for office is incredibly hot. And I know we're running out of that type of space. So I know, again, it's not necessarily a flavor of the week, or what's the inning that one is in. I think that office users do want more amenities at their fingertips for their employees. So I think it just brings to light how we need to look at our existing office parks and bring amenities to those, bring residential into those, and make them work for us more long-term, because we're seeing it successful with Bridge Park. So how can we take some of the spreading out of amenities and take it to our existing office parks to make sure that they stay competitive too? Because again, you're right, we're not going to just knock it all down and build, whatever the flavor of the week is. So how can we take what we have and make sure that it stays successful?
Chris, I just have a question that, can you hear me? Oh, I'm echoing. It's not about reducing the quality by any means, but I do think sometimes if we don't take a look at the steps along the way, the process to get there, we may not be as efficient as we want to be. And then also, what is the possibility? We've done planning the same way for a very long time. It comes through economic development, it hits the planning department, it goes to planning and zoning, it might get turned down. And along the way, we might lose a conversation that's really important, that we could have done something maybe in a different framework, a different forum, that we work together to make sure that a project doesn't hit those bumps in the road, create some predictability in knowing that everybody's kind of understanding what the main objective is, so that we're working with planning and zoning to get the best product, but that happens from the very beginning. I think sometimes Colleen will bring a project forward and she doesn't know until it hits planning and zoning whether it's ever going to work. And I think that's wrong from the very beginning. I think we should be working together from the minute that that project hits our front door, hand in hand, to figure out a way that we get the best architectural style, the density or the objective that they're looking for, the best product for the community, creating the placemaking that we're looking for. We do this hand in hand from the day Colleen hands it to any of us. And I think sometimes that's where our processes are slowed. My opinion, though.
You know, I hate to see the quality drop in anything, and I agree with Chris on that. But, you know, if you look at the Bridge Street corridor and the Bridge Street code, the reason that thing magically jumped up over there in 4 or 5 years, which astounded everybody, all of a sudden we had a downtown city, was because we had some certainty, the developers had some certainty as to what was going to happen in their world. And I think maybe that's applicable to other processes like residential housing or something. So something that we should look at and examine, because the miracle of Bridge Street happened because there was a code and it was set up and structured, and that's why there was a feeling amongst the developers that you know, we could actually execute this thing on time and on cost. So something to consider. But I also agree that we should never forego the quality that made Dublin great.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So thank you for indulging us tonight. So I will be back in September, I believe, with a mid-year update on the strategy and where we are in things. And then this will be a regular occurring annual data update with Techonomy. So they will be back again at the beginning of 2022. My goodness. So thank you. And I'm not sure who's taking it from here, but I will consider us done.
Hi, Colleen. I think I am taking it from here, correct? Anyone wants to jump in and say, no, it's my turn, feel free. Go right ahead, Doug. Okay. I want to follow the script. Lindsay, if you have my slides, if you could pull those up or begin presenting. Wait till I see them. I want to make sure you are a presenter. Go. Thank you very much. Good evening, members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on progress towards the city's goal to be the most connected city in the nation. This is an active initiative with moving parts, and we hope to take your questions and guidance after providing this update. We're going to describe what information gathering we have performed to lead us in the direction we're going. Part of that is benchmarking, and so we will show what our benchmarking strategy is. And there are multiple models for achieving this goal, all of which have advantages and potential pitfalls. We'll describe these models. We'll discuss the information we have that will help us choose the right path for the goal, and we'll discuss what is needed to move forward. Finally, we will ask for reactions, discussion, and comments on where we are and planned next steps. Can you go to the next slide? And we're going to skip this. It's just the title. Next slide. As always, we begin our discussion. I'm sorry, the slide before, one back. Thanks. We begin our discussion by restating the visionary goal. The city of Dublin will become the most connected city in the nation. And we interpret this to mean high broadband speeds, availability across the city, competitive costs, and the availability of choice for residents. And while we are most definitely talking about broadband, I want to note the positive reactions we are getting to the connected Dublin concept in general, as well as we describe the larger program as associated with much more connectedness, historic to contemporary, neighbor to neighbor, citizens to their government, etc. All of those forms of connectivity. Next slide. So how do we get there? There's a lot of information we've needed and we've worked to understand, such as what is possible, who is doing it or has already done it, how does the industry see it, what are they prepared to do or not prepared to do, how much fiber is already here serving some residents with high bandwidth internet service, how are we already doing in terms of resident subscriptions to broadband services, what kinds of speeds do we have access to compared to other cities, and what do we know from around the state. Of course, we have to acknowledge that there is high bandwidth broadband service available to many residents of the city. It is not universally available, and there are parts of the city without choice or cost competition. Nonetheless, any plan we execute to supplement or add net new infrastructure or service needs to have as clear a picture as possible of current state. Next slide. So we've undertaken benchmarking to understand how cities have approached similar goals. We have aligned subject matter experts who have designed, constructed, run, or financed municipal-owned broadband networks. Rob McCann, Hunter Newby, and Paul Johnson are all contacts from within the Intelligent Community Forum network who have developed residential broadband networks in the United States and elsewhere around the world. Most importantly, they are advising us not only on the engineering and construction aspects of our goal, but also the funding, financial, and operations of the assets and services that will be required. We've received excellent information from them and have opened an ongoing dialogue that should assist us through additional stages of our activity. The communities you see here have also issued documents soliciting partners and service providers to develop broadband networks for their residents. For most of these, this is in the form of an RFI or RFP. We have been able to review these documents for benchmarking, as well as review the results they've achieved in terms of who has responded and what kinds of solutions have they proposed. None of these communities is exactly the same, so their diversity and variety has informed our conclusions. Next slide, please. We have engaged the service provider and carrier industries in our activities as well for a number of different reasons. First, to determine what they may already be doing that we are not aware of. Next, to determine what they may be planning to do that could impact our goals. Then we need to know what can they do or are willing to do that addresses our goal. Also, what they cannot do or are unwilling to do. Some providers are serving Dublin residents. We want to be open and transparent about our goals and not do anything that might be perceived as blocking or establishing barriers to organizations seeking to provide service to residents. We've held extensive conversations with the companies listed here. All of them have different proposed solutions to the central objective of our most connected city goal. All of their solutions are viable, but have very different costs, funding models, and service models. Each of these organizations is still at the table and has made themselves available for any information we need as we move forward. Next slide. We have gathered information from outside sources as well. This graphic is intended to show how many Dublin residents are connected to broadband internet services over fiber specifically. I recommend that you take this information in with a huge grain of salt. This resource ranks Dublin as 64th, as the 64th most connected city in Ohio. But their definition of connectivity does not match our own. It's useful to look at other metrics.
It finds that 8% of residents in Dublin have fiber connected to them. Again, this defines connection in a particular way, but it's good to recognize that some of the companies providing services to residents today are doing so over non-fiber means. Next slide. So this is where we've landed. There are 3 models we could follow in order to meet our goal of being the most connected city in the nation. The first is what we are calling the incumbent model. This reflects discussions we've had with carriers and service providers who would like to be a part of the solution leading to our goal. Each of these providers currently provides broadband internet service to Dublin. They each have different coverage areas. They each have different plans to continue increasing speeds and coverage. And as of now, they each are aware of our goal and are preparing proposals for how we can reach our goals. These proposals may or may not meet our needs, but the communications are being managed and their perspectives are being included in our models. The second is what we're calling a new entrant model. These are organizations who are not currently offering broadband internet service inside Dublin. Each has core capabilities. Not all of them use fiber as their core technology. They each present innovations on how they would achieve speeds, coverage, and choice for Dublin, including leveraging our existing fiber, managing new services, and funding the construction and management. The slide may be hard to read, so I'll let you know that we've talked to Starry, Lit Communities, Bresco Broadband, Horizon Broadband, and Point Broadband. The third is a city-owned model. We have miles of fiber optic cable, much of which extends close to neighborhoods. Under this model, the city would construct fiber to homes or to the curb. It could involve an open access model in which any provider, incumbent or new entrant, or the city itself could offer broadband internet service to customers. This would likely involve partnering with an entity to manage the service. And just because we told you there are 3 models, we have to mention a 4th option. Which is a hybrid of 2 or more of these models. It is possible to combine a new entrant with a city-owned, or an incumbent with a city-owned, etc. We do not have a specific plan for that model, but each of the other models includes the possibility of leveraging city-owned fiber to meet the goal. Next slide. We are drawing the conclusion that for our purposes, for our goal, all information points to this reality. Most connected means fiber connected. While there are a lot of technologies that could meet the bandwidth, coverage, and choice objectives of our goal, in order to be competitive in the future, our residents need to focus on fiber connections. We need this conclusion to drive the project. Wireless solutions depend also on fiber. Other connection types are changing to fiber in the long term. Any solution proposal needs to satisfactorily address this conclusion. We want to support, next slide. We want to support our conclusions with information we noted that we had uncovered, including Dublin's subscription rates according to the census. This shows self-reporting of census tracts with higher or lower lack of broadband service subscriptions. Our own surveys back up this pattern. So if you look at the orange area on the map up there, you can see the straight line that defines where the franchise agreement separated one carrier boundary from another. Next slide, please. We've also backed up our analysis with data from the online test most of us use to test our internet speeds. For Dublin, some 70% of those who have tested meet the federal FCC requirement for broadband as of July of 2020. Of course, this requirement is 25 megabits per second, and that we can tell, only the FCC thinks that that is broadband anymore. For our also very conservative target of 100 megabits per second, some 32% of those testing meet that target. This is only slightly above the orange line, which is that of the state of Ohio. So we know we are not where we need to be. Next slide. Please take this table with another very large grain of salt. But this is another data source that places Dublin 50th among comparable Ohio cities in terms of median broadband speeds. Again, the definitions of comparable are debatable, but measures such as these are out there and we are paying attention to them. So again, you have some communities there with 1,000 residents. It is certainly easier to get greater broadband speeds to 1,000 residents than it is to 50,000 residents. Next slide. So we believe we have identified the models to choose from in order to move towards our goal. Either the incumbent model, the new entrant model, the city-owned model, or a hybrid approach will allow us to make Dublin homes fiber connected, competitive, and relatively future-proof. We now need to execute a study to move forward on one of these models. Building fiber to all Dublin homes will require new construction, and that construction will require a design. No matter which model is used to construct the fiber, we need a construction design. Different service models will need an independent assessment of what is called a take rate. This is the number of households that indicate they would order new service at a certain price point. If this take rate is above a certain threshold, a company will be willing to fund a certain amount of construction. If it is below a certain threshold, the city may need to find alternative funding options for the construction. The city cannot be the source of this information. With a technical design, the city will have a cost estimate for what it may take to build the network we would need. With this cost estimate, the city can determine how to address potential revenue from the service. And in understanding the costs and revenues, the city can determine how best to fund the project. No matter who builds the network, we need this information in order to enter into agreements in any of the models. We have open discussions with multiple expert organizations to conduct the design study we now need. Pending feedback and discussion at this work session, our next action is to engage one of the companies to conduct and deliver the study to us. With your positive direction, we will contract an organization to complete this work. We will determine costs, revenue potential, and funding options. We will then return to you for a funding and execution decision. Next slide. However, for now, we just want to pause for your feedback, questions, discussion, with the summary that we've reached the conclusion that the most connected means fiber connected, that the study we are conducting will deliver the cost estimates we need, no matter which model is chosen, and our ultimate decision point will include the funding option needed to execute the plan. I just want to note that Kirby did much of the research that went into this and may be on the call and available for questions about some of that data. And Greg Dunn is also here and available for questions about the industry and the direction we're going in. So next slide, we will welcome questions and discussion now.
Great presentation, Doug. I think you laid it out pretty clearly. We've got lots of work to do. So I'm all for it. I'd say let's get a move on, study it, and execute it.
Doug, I agree with Andy. Thank you very much for that presentation. It is spot on. It is focused. It is direct. It gives us direction. I fully support your efforts. I think you're right when you say, you know, the answer is fiber. So let's go with fiber. Let's figure out a way to do it. I fully support it. And I completely agree with what Andy just said. And I thank you for your presentation.
Doug, I think this also plays in hand with some of the economic development questions we've been asking about. If we can be the city that is the most connected in terms of fiber, and people can work from here, from home, whether they're working from home or in a shared space or what have you, I think that's really critical to our continued success at diversifying our tax base. So I'm really supportive of the work that you're doing. I think it's really important. Thanks to you and to Kirby and your team for all the work you've done on this.
Thank you.
Doug, I have a question for you. Well, one, I have a compliment because you make this complicated stuff so understandable, and I appreciate that. I was mesmerized by every slide, and you explained it so clearly. It made the path forward so easy to understand, and I appreciate that. I want to ask you, though, and I don't doubt it, but I'm curious why fiber and why wireless doesn't work, because I know for myself, if I can't get something on my Wi-Fi because my fiber's not working or whatever, I have a little trouble with my connection, I go straight to my LTE wireless. So tell me, why that isn't part of this. And then my second question, and I'll let you answer these, is if we depend on fiber, and you did say it would last for into the future, does fiber ever become not adequate enough, or the fiber itself become not able to keep up with maybe future fiber? And I only ask that from a very naive point of view, because 30 years ago I built my house and I put in, cable for everything to be connected. Then when the time came 2 years later to hook up my house, the cable company said, well, your cable's no good anymore. It doesn't hold enough, or it isn't the right kind of cable. And so, I had to rewire all over again. So naive questions, but certainly ones that I wonder about.
No, they're very good questions. Thanks for asking them, and allow me to again give credit to, we've been working on this for several weeks, and a whole bunch of people contributed to this. And so I appreciate the fact that it's clear. It is not a matter that wireless or other means don't work or won't work. It's a matter of the difference between a technical solution for you and I achieving connectivity for ourselves versus making a community-wide plan. And sometimes there can be just too many options there, and it's just not helping us get to where we're trying to go. So in order to be most connected, we have to pick a direction, and we have to zero in on that technology. So there are going to be situations in which potentially a 5G or another wireless technology may be something that we have to do. And so I've tried to be careful with my language, but we have to tell the industry a very clear direction. We can't be wishy-washy. We can't be, hey, we just kind of want to achieve this. We have to be very definite and clear. And again, because we don't know what the current census says, but we're somewhere around 50,000 people and homes, and we have a lot of diversity here. We've got to pick a direction, and we've got to hammer in on it. So I wanted to mention that. The other thing is, and let me know if I didn't fully answer that. The other thing is
You did.
I was careful to use the word relatively future-proof, because future-proof, who can say, right? I will say about the fiber that Dublin put in 2 decades ago is still running. Now, if we had our choice, we would certainly replace it from time to time. But in order to put a fiber system in place, the construction really involves putting the fiber conduit in place, and then it makes it possible to replace the fiber as you go forward year over year. Not saying that that's the best design necessarily, but you don't expect fiber that you put in to last forever, but a conduit system. And quite frankly, the cable system that was put in, that conduit is still there and functioning, and they're not going to stop using it just because there's something better. In a matter of decades, we think that that's pretty solid in terms of predicting the future, but nothing is forever.
Yeah, if I could add, 5G technology's got some inherent limitations too. It doesn't penetrate houses very well. I mean, it can give you high bandwidth, but it's also going to be limited in bandwidth, whereas fiber is technically not limited. I know that's almost unbelievable, but you can keep putting more and more electronics on a given fiber. But we will be mindful as we're looking at this, that 5G could affect the take rates we're looking at, because certain people may just want to use their phones and be happy with the somewhat less speeds and bandwidth they get.
Hey, Doug, it's Chris. I too want to thank you for this presentation and the clarity and really the brevity that achieves the clarity. I think you're spot on with fiber is the solution. As you know, I've been meeting with Spectrum and AT&T and those people for more than 4 years, begging them, will you play the fiber game with us? Will you play the fiber game with us? And they have yet to respond in any way, shape, or form in any real sense of showing a willingness to do that. So, I have the good fortune of listening to a lot of conversations from WARPC and listening to a lot of conversations from the Ohio Municipal League and the Ohio Mayor's Alliance and hear what people are doing. And I hear a lot about these these pilot programs that they're doing, and they're spending millions of dollars on these pilot programs. And the question that nobody is asking is, what do you do when the pilot program's over? Because the person that you paid the millions of dollars to, they own the equipment and they own the infrastructure and they own all of the stuff. And if they choose to continue that pilot program, they can send you another big bill to continue to do that. Or if they say, as you point out so eloquently, if the take rates aren't right and all of those things, they can walk away, and they can walk away with millions of public funds and leave nothing behind other than this pilot program and say, well, here you go. Now you know it can work if you want to do it. And then you have to start over from the ground again. And so I am a big proponent, and it's no secret, that I think it should be a municipally owned system, whereas we can lease out, as you suggest, these pairs of fiber or whatever to anyone who is interested in leasing them. And I think it is a utility, and it needs a lot of maintenance, as you so aptly illustrate that our conduit is still intact, because we look after it and we maintain it. I don't know that everyone looks after their conduit with fiber in it like we do, because it's right under our nose. And we know when someone comes with a permit, we know where they're going to dig, and we can line that up with, we have fiber right there, and we can intervene on behalf of our fiber. If we don't know where other people's fiber are, we cannot intervene on their behalf. And therefore, those systems are not subject to the same level of maintenance as ours would be. And I think you can look at power grid system, right? That there is a power grid system in place, and a lot of different people can play in the selling of that power. Same with natural gas. So, I think that it is, I don't want to completely disrupt private enterprise. They can still compete on a very level playing field to choose to purchase or lease or whatever the fiber that we would install in ground. And I think that's a great revenue generator for us to A, continue to install more fiber, and B, to continue to maintain our fiber system so that whenever the next fiber is, whatever that is, we can run it through our conduit system and continue to serve the community well. So I really appreciate the look at it. I'm in favor of us owning these things and leasing them out and maintaining them. I think you have to look no further than in some of the things that happened in Texas, right? What happens when a system isn't well maintained and meets a challenge. So that's my soapbox. So I'll get off of it now.
Thank you for your soapbox. And I would say that ultimately a decision has to be made. Like, you don't get to play it safe or too safe. What we want to do is draw conclusions that put you in a position of being on a rock solid foundation. And just with our experience in fiber in the past, what we know is that if a new technology had come along, and one has, 5G has come along and has threatened fiber, and our investment in fiber has held up. We're not in a situation where we say, oh, we shouldn't invest in fiber, we should have waited for 5G. Absolutely not. And the position that I think we'd like to put council in is, it's 10 years down the road. You've made a decision and you can stand by it, and you stand up and you say, based on the information at the time, we're glad we did what we decided to do, and it has been to the benefit of the community. Is another technology going to come along in 8 years from now and say, maybe we missed the mark a little bit? Certainly it will, but all indications are that whatever that next technology is, it will also depend on fiber, and communities that have it are going to benefit from the next technology too, even if it's not fiber.
Well, and 5G is really dependent on fiber at some point too, right? I mean, it's only going to go so far, and it's going to be relying on fiber. And so, I could see, with the climate changes and things that we're having, ice storms or wind storms or whatever, really compromising a 5G system over, a short or long period of time where fiber is going to be a much more stable, particularly in this part of the country or world, a much more stable means of transmitting that data.
Yeah, 5G is completely dependent on fiber for what they call backhaul from the little antennas back to the central office. I mean, there will be an explosion of fiber in the country just to support 5G.
And I see all of this changing from, the streaming services. The cable that comes to the home is probably going to go away pretty quickly, which is the way most of us get our internet connectivity, right? Because the streaming services and all of that. So I would imagine the load shift that is going to be happening onto these other systems is probably greater than what it can bear once the cable portion is really pulled out of the market and you're purely on these streaming systems and things like that.
The cable companies are going to lose their video business where you buy the block of programs, but they're going to still be able to provide the streaming service via their cable modems, which is, can deliver up to a gig. So they won't be going away, but they're going to be changing their business model, and in fact are changing it.
Yeah, Chris, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that fiber is the foundation for all of this future technology, and it makes a lot of sense. You can't have 5G without fiber. I just think that's the right direction. And even over time, as technologies change, you can see they change very rapidly in some sense, and in other senses, they still change slowly too, right? There are still things that will always rely on fiber or on cable or on some of these other technologies, because it just isn't a choice. Because things don't change across an entire country the size of our country in places that are rural or suburban or urban all at the same time, right? They change in different periods at different rates over time. And so you oftentimes have to play to that lower common denominator. And even if fiber eventually becomes that lower common denominator, you're still going to have to play to it. And I still think it's going to be the foundation for all of these things for quite some time.
Doug, I very much appreciated the very beginning of your discussion. You laid out what we mean by being connected. Mm-hmm. And you talked about reliability. You talked about price competitive, so, and a variety, very well articulated. And if there are 5 factors that we have to meet to say we are the most connected, I think it seems only logical that we're going to have some sort of our own type of fiber in that, or if you go down one path with one provider, you're going to have a hard time with the competitive vector. So I think by our definition, I think it's going to help define some of these directions. I don't think 100 megabits, even a year from now, is going to be the right answer. It's probably going to be double. And in 5 years or 10 years, it's going to be much greater. All we know is it keeps on going, right? I think of what is it, the commercial on the cellular side, how many G's are there anyway, right? I mean, it just is going to keep going. So one of my requests would be, whatever we model, we should model for much greater than 100 megabits per second.
I would be surprised. Yeah, we're looking at 1 gig to 10 gig. I mean, it's unbelievable. But those are the numbers we're talking about.
So I think whatever you bring back to us, please bring us the 1 gig to 10 gig, because that's really what we're going to have to deal with. And I think any of these providers that are listening to this or interested in doing this, we're not going to be the only community in the United States that's going to do it. That long list of comparables with all the discussion going on now is going to get greater and greater. So we're ready to do it. We're energized to do it. So, bring us some very interesting models of how we can build a hybrid where there is a public-private partnerships here that work really well, because we've been talking about this for a while. So like my colleagues, let's run. And I very much like the approach, but we're ready to go. So, I'm hopeful people will say, not pilot with us necessarily, but actually do it with us and put together a program to make it happen, because I think we're, particularly interested in doing so. So I would be interested in see a fiber and then our city owned, but then I would love to see a hybrid model too, because I think we could do something interesting that maybe other communities wouldn't be quite ready to do. And then all the discussions about, how we manage this go forward. We have plans for, road repaving and maintenance on annual plans. I think in our next CIP, or the one that's coming up, we've got to start thinking about this as a vital infrastructure that a municipality will be responsible for in some way, and figure out how do we do that. So your study in terms of your technical study, which I think is what you're going to bring back next. I would like us to see, how do we think about that on a long-term program? Because I'm sure funding like TIFs and other things would work quite well in this environment. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, Lindsay, may I ask you to stop sharing your screen for a minute so I can see all the colleagues? I just want to make sure that everyone's comments can be heard, and I can't see everybody with that screen share. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, Doug, very concise. Thank you very much. That's the kind of information we really needed to see, and you put it out there in a nice, simplistic form. So thank you, Doug. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Members of council, this is Dana. I would just add that, the study that we're proposing to do, as Doug mentioned, we've been in discussions with several folks who have the capability to do that. Our intent is to move forward with it. We feel we're budgeted for it. We can take that out of capital dollars and or other Dublin related type dollars that are already in the budget. So I probably would not, I just want to kind of let you know, that would be my intent, and to not have to come back, for the appropriation of those dollars. I've talked to Matt Stifler about it, and we'll just, this is such a high priority of importance that we can use those dollars. And if I need funding later in the year, I'll come ask for it then. But I think for right now, we just want to move out on the study. I would estimate, this is going to range anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000. It could be more than that, but I don't think much more than that. But we will take those dollars out of funding that's already related to broadband and fiber optics.
If I could just ask a question, one of the slides said Dublin is 64th most connected, and fiber availability is 8%. Would it make sense to set specific goals? We're 25th in 2 years or something like that. And as far as fiber availability, 50% in 2 or 3 years. Would it make sense to do something like that?
I think being measurable is always a good thing, and you want to know where you stand. I would say that those particular scales, I just didn't find them that reliable because of the differences between things, but you do need a number. You need to say, you need to benchmark against other communities that have the same kinds of coverage, choice, and cost goals that we have, and say, have they reached 100%, or are they at 98% or 80%? So that is something, let us take that with the other information we want to bring back to you and say, this is how we'll measure that. But I definitely think benchmarking and measuring is wise. You don't want to do it without any. How do you?
And we're looking at 100% fiber availability as the plan.
At what time period though?
Well, yeah, that we need to figure. But yes, I mean, once we commit to doing this, construction shouldn't take more than a year and a half.
Wow. Okay, great.
I have one more question for you, Doug. And it just slipped my mind. Oh my gosh, I must be having a senior moment right now. I'll hop off and I'll think of it in a minute. That's ridiculous. Okay, I'll be back.
Hey, so Greg, when you say construction, what do you mean by construction will take a year to year and a half? What is your definition of construction?
Well, you need to lay the backbone, and you need to have the laterals, throughout the community. And then as people order service, they'll build the connection into the house. So you would initially build all the connectivity necessary, and then build the I guess I call them drops into the house. So you can do this piecemeal too and roll it out over time. I mean, but seemingly, in a situation where some of the folks will have it and some won't, I would think we probably want to build it rather quickly and get it done and have 100% availability. But that's still TBD. But we're looking at 100% availability and probably quickly, I would think.
Yeah, I appreciate that Greg added the TBD to the end of that, because what we're looking at after the purpose of the analysis and the study is to say, hey, if we were to build this out, completely overbuild, how much does it cost? How would you design it? That's that kind of information, as Doug alluded to. Then that'll help us to know more about what we don't know right now and enable us to have a more intelligent conversation with the industry as we try to figure out, okay, is it a Dublin alone model? Is it a industry alone model, or is it something in between on that spectrum of models? So this is just an analysis we definitely need in our own hip pocket, so that we can speak even more intelligently about what that takes to get there, and we'll figure it out, what that would look like going forward. So
yeah,
the TBD thing is we're not sure how fast it would be built out or whatever until we determine what that model would be.
And I guess I probably should say we could do it that fast. But council may elect not to, but it could be done.
Well, Greg and I have witnessed 2 overbuilds of the community in our lifespan here with the city of Dublin, and I think between the WOW build and the Ameritech build and the rebuild of the build, we've seen them do this a few times. So that year to year and a half, I'd say, is probably about right, even considering phasing.
So that's my question that I forgot, and as I was listening to everything else, too many things spin in my head. But the study that you're doing, and I know it talked about revenue, are we looking at this being a revenue generator as we go into, I know it has to pay for itself, it has to pay for the maintenance of this system and all that, but are we looking at a profitable revenue stream also in this study? Will the study talk about, those sorts of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I should have expected it. At base, what we're saying is we are not losing money. Like any solution should pay for itself. We're not, a requirement is not that we make a profit. But I will say that the fiber program that we currently have has been throwing off revenue and has paid for itself many times over. So what we want to know is, what are the revenue potentials there? How can the revenue be used to finance the building of it? And then what else is there? There could be a situation where, hey, if the city wants to own something, it could have significant revenue potential there that's different from something else. Our first objective is to meet the coverage need. And then we need to know, can you pay for that? We do not want to lose money, but there is definitely revenue here. The question is also, do you want to do things by revenue, or do you want some other means of doing it? So we need to look at all of the models that are being employed around the country, and some of them may be easier for us to finance than others. So what I could commit to is saying we definitely do not intend for this to be a money loser. But whether revenue is just something that helps maintain it or it throws off some additional funds, that's something that we would like to continue to study.
I appreciate that. And I asked that because as we've gone through this pandemic and we've looked at this revenue sources that we have here in the city, and it's the payroll income tax, it's nice to have different eggs in your basket than that.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely.
And I think you're exactly right, this really speaks to an economic development system, because as much as housing, of whether or not it's going to, be at the end of a cul-de-sac or, whatever, I think this is going to be a way to compete that is probably going to be more reaching in terms of time than architecture, or the trendy architecture. And this isn't chasing a trend, right? When we lower our architecture standards, or we change them, or we change our materials and things like that, we're chasing trends. This isn't chasing a trend. This is a commitment to sustainability, and I think the value of homes in the community.
I think, and just to put a little economic development hat on, I think the better way to look at this is the economic development that happens and the tax revenues that would come out of all these people working at home with high-speed internet. Looking at your rate of return on the investment. Frankly, if there were a real good rate of return on an investment like this, the private industry probably would have done it. So, but the fact is the city can take a much broader view of this infrastructure.
So I'm going to say that I have received a lot of great feedback here. We have definitely listened. This is what I hoped for, certainly opening to listening to more, but I know you have other agenda to move on to here. So if there's any other final thoughts or anything like that, I really appreciate it. We have our marching orders. We will come back to you. And, I appreciate the time and you looking at what we have uncovered.
Hey, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Greg. Really appreciate it.
Doug, when are you expecting to come back?
I am subject to the rest of the calendar here, so I'll probably defer to Dana on that. We're going to go ahead with the study. And so I think we'd like to have something substantive before we come back before you. So it wouldn't be before we had something there. Is that fair to say, Dana?
Yeah, that is. I've asked Doug and Greg as they assess potential, providers of the study to assess the turnaround time on that, which we would like to be as short as possible. So, I'm hoping we can be back to you with significant information, well vetted, probably towards the end of the summer, after you get back from your recess. So I'm talking maybe the August to September timeframe. If that's going to be longer than that, I'll keep you informed on that. But the goal is see, can we get a good thorough study done, and how quickly can we get it? And we don't want to give up quality for time, but we think we can get a pretty good study turned around pretty quick. So
that's great. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, Mayor, if it's okay, well, I'll hand it over to Megan then.
Super. Thank you.
Good evening, members of council. I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully you can see the slide now. As Dana, is it sharing? As Dana indicated at the outset of the meeting, we wanted to provide a status update on the acquisition of the North Riverview Street properties and have an initial conversation with council about the plans for the future of the properties. I will provide some background on the zoning, historical significance, and the overall condition of each property. And then we'll wrap up with a high-level discussion to garner some insight from council about the goals for these properties as well as next steps. So the location and boundaries of the properties we're acquiring are shown on the screen. There's 6 properties or parcels along the west side of North Riverview Street, and then 2 along the east side for a total of 8 parcels. And these are north of Bridge Street near Bridge and High. Here's an update on where we are in the process to acquire the properties. We did perform a property condition assessment, and that was completed in late December, and the final report was provided to City Council, and that report will be very useful as we move forward with these properties. Council approved the purchase of the property on January 4th, and the REPA was executed on February 10th. It's our understanding at this point that all of the tenants have vacated the properties, and we're going to have a final walkthrough with the owner this Thursday. And we're looking at closing on the properties next week. I do plan to schedule a walkthrough of the properties following closing to provide council members who are interested in seeing the homes an opportunity to do so. The total acreage of the properties is 2.78 acres, and the breakdown of the 6 residential home lots along the west side of North Riverview is as shown on the slide. We also have approximately 1.8 acres along the east side of North Riverview Street, with one of the parcels being a residential home lot and the other wooded. During your last council meeting, council approved the historic district rezoning, and the properties along the west side of North Riverview are now zoned HD residential, and the properties along the east side are zoned HD public. It is noteworthy to report or share that during the ARB review, the members specifically recommended the properties along the east side of along the west side of North Riverview be rezoned to historic residential to retain the neighborhood character, and the Planning Commission supported that recommendation. And then as we look at the properties along the east side of North Riverview, I thought it'd be helpful to take a quick look at the Riverside Crossing Park Master Plan that was adopted by Council in 2016. The master plan includes these properties in the footprint of the park, which is planned to be a primarily naturalized area with pathways and trails. So we'll need to consider this as well as the new HD public zoning as we discuss the plans for the structure that's located at the end of North Street, which I'll show you a picture of in a few slides. It's also important to note that all of the properties being acquired are recommended contributing to the Dublin High Street Historic District by previous historic and cultural assessment that was completed by Ann Lee in 2016 and 2017. So next, I thought I have a slide highlighting each of the properties. So I just want to provide a high level overview of the structures and the property condition assessments. And there is extensive detail about each of these properties in the report that I shared with council over a week ago. So like I said, I'm just going to provide a very high level on each of them. So for 17 North Riverview Street, we have a 1.5 story craftsman style single family house resting on a concrete block foundation. West of the house is a detached garage. The interior wood finishes are mostly original and in good condition. Most of the interior doors are original and have been maintained. The newer finishes and upgrades to the kitchen and bathroom do seem complementary to the original home. The property also has a barn at the rear that appears to have been moved to the site, as the interior structural columns are not original to the building. The roof is also a newer standing seam metal roof. There's a presence of lead-based paint, and there's assumed to be asbestos containing materials throughout the home. There's a considerable work or amount of work that would be needed to bring the electrical, plumbing, and mechanical systems up to code. And then we have 27 North Riverview Street. We have a 2-story gabled L single family house resting on a stone foundation. There's also a large carriage barn to the west of the house. The home appears to be the most historically accurate in terms of original construction along the street. The interior of the home is a mix of detailing that's original to the wood finishes. There's some modernization that has occurred in the kitchen and the living room, where the fireplace masonry and hearth are all of a newer style. There's one room on the interior where a fiber type ceiling tile was adhered with mastic to what's probably the original ceiling behind it. The carriage barn's in poor condition and has a sagging roof at the ridge. There's also signs of rotted wood clapboard siding. And there's a presence of lead-based paint and asbestos containing materials. And there's, again, considerable amount of work that would need to be done to bring the electrical, plumbing, and mechanical systems up to code. At 37 North Riverview Street, we have a 1.5 story hall and parlor style single family house resting on a fieldstone foundation. The roof needs major repairs and the windows are not original to the home. The interior flooring is a mix of original flooring and replacement wood type flooring. Kitchen and bath have been upgraded. Several of the rooms have spray texture applied to the ceilings. There's not much of the original interior architectural detailing left that's recognizable. The attic has original wood flooring with what appears to be a plaster finish on the ceiling. There, once again, is a presence of lead-based paint and asbestos containing materials, and there is considerable amount of work that would be needed to the electrical, plumbing, and mechanical systems to bring it up to code. With 40 East Bridge Street, there's a 2-story vernacular style single-family house resting on a stone foundation. The roof's in poor condition and needs replaced. The interior is a mix of original wood flooring, replacement vinyl plank wood look flooring and tile. There's new kitchen and bathroom upgrades. Stairs have all been modernized. For the most part, the original historic interior details no longer exist. There is a presence, again, of lead-based paint and asbestos, and a considerable amount of work needed to the electrical, plumbing, and mechanical systems to bring them up to code. And then we have 45 North Riverview Street with a 1-story gabled L style single-family house resting on a stone foundation. The roof's in a condition that it needs to be replaced in the next couple of years. There's also a storage shed and a barn that are detached. Interior of the home is a mix of original wood flooring that's been painted and some replacement vinyl plank wood look flooring again. There's some upgrades with newer style kitchen cabinets and bathroom fixtures. For the most part, the original historic interior details no longer exist. The basement is accessible by a ladder extension currently, and there is asbestos and lead paint. And once again, extensive work needed to bring the systems up to code. Moving on to 53 North Riverview Street, there's a single-story vernacular style single-family home resting on a concrete block foundation, as well as a detached garage. The roof's in fair condition, and there's several styles of windows that don't appear to be original. Interior of the home, again, has mixed flooring with some original, some tile, some carpet. There have been upgrades again to the kitchen and the bathroom. Ceiling in this home is lower than standard, lower than normal, and there are cracks that indicate some water damage. There's, again, presence of lead and asbestos, and the systems need a significant amount of work to bring them up to code. And finally, we have 62 North Riverview Street, which is the red house at the end of North Street on the east side of North Riverview. This structure is a 2-story single-family house that rests on a mix of stone and concrete block, and the lower portion of the back of the home is actually dug into the hillside with their stone, and then access to the stairs is actually carved into the stone, and the roof is in fair condition. Interior is a mix again. It looks like there were some changes that occurred likely in the 50s. There have been some upgrades in the kitchen and the bathroom. And some of the trim and the details are original and in fair condition. There is lead and asbestos, and the systems do need some work to bring them up to code. So that's a wrap on the property condition assessments. Now we'd like to talk about next steps for these properties. The city manager is proposing an advisory committee be formed to help guide the process moving forward. The advisory committee would report back to council as a whole at a few different checkpoints. We understand that council members Fox and Keeler would be the designated representatives for council, and we recommend one representative from the ARB and one from the Historical Society, and then 3 staff representatives. At this point, we're envisioning the advisory committee's role could be to advise on an RFP process, and they could provide input into the development of the RFP, recommend the final RFP to council for approval prior to advertising. The advisory committee could also review and evaluate the proposals that we receive, and then recommend a selection or multiple selections to council for council's approval before awarding the opportunity. That's what we're currently thinking for the advisory committee. And then before we move forward with a process and with working with the advisory committee, we would like to get council's general thoughts collectively. Specifically, we'd be interested in hearing any thoughts that you might have about goals such as historic preservation, any restrictions, financial considerations, and then on the heels of the recent rezoning, just like to confirm your thoughts on use as residential and public/park. And that concludes my presentation, and we look forward to your feedback. Thank you very much.
So I'll start just because I am very passionate about that street, the identity of that particular area and preserving it. I see as poor or fair as those properties may be, I see them as huge opportunities. I've restored 3 historic homes over the last 25 years, and all of them had lead-based paint. All of them had asbestos. It sounds intimidating, but you just kind of nibble away at it. And financially, I think it's a win for us. I think it's a win for whoever buys those properties. Who wouldn't want to be able to walk within a block to restaurants, the bridge, and so on? And while it may seem like it wouldn't be financially feasible to preserve those properties in more or less the form that they were in when they were originally constructed, while it would seem like that would be impossible, I believe it's very possible. And that area is in such demand that I believe we won't have a hard time finding a family or buyer that is as passionate about preservation as we are. So I certainly have other thoughts, but I don't want to take too much time.
Well, I'll go next. I'm also like Andy, very passionate about this. I think it's really important to look at the objectives of why the city purchased them in the first place. And I think that's a good starting point. One, these properties have been in flux for a very long time and created a lot of controversy. And at this point, we have the opportunity to preserve an entire block of historic properties comprehensively instead of one at a time. So I think the first objective is to say that the city has stepped out here and created a vehicle to be able to maintain 6 to 7 properties that are historically significant, that we are going to do something that will preserve them by probably, I hope, historic conservation covenant, and also that will lead to restoration and an ongoing maintenance of them. Secondly, I think one of the objectives that we talked about by making them residential is that we want to see people live in them as primary residences. One of the things that's not happening in the historic district or in the Bridge Street district is any kind of affordable housing that a family could have a starter home in, who would be willing to put some blood, sweat, and tears into it. So I would like to see them be owner occupied as a primary residence. And when we go forward, that's one of the objectives. The other thing is, I think that the RFP, I don't want to see them flipped. I don't want to see them as investment properties. I think it's really important that we give an opportunity to citizens to have the ability to, who appreciates and is willing to renovate and live in them for a period of time, the opportunity to do so, and not have an RFP out there that would allow a developer to come in and buy them all up and then fix them all up all at once. I think organically, we'll have a much better product by having them independently owned. And we have an ongoing and available resource in the Architectural Review Board that would monitor their restoration under the guidelines that everybody else in the historic district who is a resident has to abide by. So those are the things that I think are important, and I'm anxious to hear what everybody else says.
Hey, Megan, just a quick question. Could you explain to me what the request for proposal would be? Requesting a proposal for what? Like, is this, are you trying to find somebody who's going to come up with a plan? Who's going to come up with, like, what is the RFP? What is the ultimate goal of the RFP?
The RFP would be to initiate the process. There would be several sections to the RFP where we would list what our goals are. It could be for, for redevelopment, we list what the goals are for the project, what the use is, any constraints or restrictions, deed restrictions, things like that. And then, yeah, we would see which developers or individuals are interested in proposing on the project, and we would review their proposals.
So it would be important then to, so it sounds like if I'm just counting heads, it would seem as though, and for me personally, I think that if we can preserve them as individual family homes and incentivize somebody either individual, it just seems to me that if you're gonna, there's six houses, what we're gonna get is we're gonna get some company that's gonna come in and say, okay, well, I can do this on all six. And then they're going to do exactly what Jane's saying she doesn't want to have happen, which is then sell them, market them individually and sell them. It would just seem to me, and I'm no Andy Keeler when it comes to renovating historic homes and all that, but it would seem to me that if you're going to, I don't think you're going to get one family to come in and respond to the RFP and say, I'll take that little red house and I'll renovate it and I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll move my family in. How are we managing, if it's going to be put out there to deal with all six properties, how likely are we to get the individual families who are going to say, I would like to do what Andy's done with these properties and renovate it and move my family in it? I just don't know. If I were interested in doing that, I don't know. I would be, talk about intimidated by asbestos. I would not be submitting in a response to an RFP from the city to sort of look at all six of these properties from a kind of a global. Do you understand my question?
Yeah, and we could structure the RFP however we would like. We could structure it to invite proposals for all the properties collectively and or individual properties and see what we get. So we keep the door open to either or.
And I think that's the key. I think the key is in an RFP process, you're really opening, you're putting some parameters out there and some definition. You're willing to dispose of these under certain terms and conditions or aspirations. And then you see how people respond. And you may get any combination of requests. I would only caution, and this is probably should be the discussion of the advisory committee. And the thing I'm recommending is that this advisory committee talk through all these things about how an RFP would be designed and then bring that back to council so you can see it before it's released. And again, these kind of questions are the very kind of questions we want to hear tonight, kind of at a high level. But I do think that, as Megan's suggesting, you're going to go through one thing the council said when you bought them is you didn't want to be a landlord. You did want to return them back towards something that looks as more like preservation and single family use. And so you're headed down the right road there with that. It's how do we structure something that we properly dispose of them in accordance with the law. And then it's a competitive process. And yeah, you're going to get a mixed bunch of responses in different ways. But that's the beauty of it. You can sit and evaluate it after the fact and decide what works best for you. And oh, by the way, if you don't like any of them, you can throw it out and start over again. So that's kind of how that goes too.
So do we know, to the extent that we have inspected them, I guess for me, I'm wondering, so let's just take any one of them for, I guess the oldest one, or the one that you said that was the truest to the architecture of the time. Let's just take that one, for example. Do we know what someone like Andy Keeler would come in and say, this is what it would cost me to tear out all the asbestos, take out all the lead paint, replace the wiring, replace the plumbing, the structures, HVAC, and all of that stuff. This is what it would cost me Do we know what warts they have, or do we just generally know the general condition of them?
At this point, we know the condition, but we do know the condition in a pretty good amount of detail. We just haven't put estimated costs to the condition. So that would be part of what we would be seeking as part of the proposals that we receive.
Got it. Thank you.
Megan, I like the RFP, and I like doing as many different ways as we possibly could, you know, collectively, individually, just so we get an idea of what our options are. I would want the language to be really strong that whatever you do to them, they have to be historically accurate, and they have to do it. Like they're benchmarks. You have 18 months to do the roof. You have, 36 months to do the interior. You have, 10 months to do the outbuildings. Like, they are a real eyesore right now because of their condition, not because of what they are. And so I don't want someone to come in and put an RFP in and say, well, I planned on it, but I lost my job, or we had another child, or life happened, my mother got sick, whatever. And then we don't get the improvements that we're looking for. So I would like multiple RFPs just so we can see what's available. I'd like really clear timetables that they have to do these things. I'd like standards of which they have to meet them, that they have to be period appropriate, and the colors of the house have got to fall within the parameters of what would happen in the day. So if we're going to, I guess my point is if we're going to do these and keep them, then I want to go all in to making them really good and really accurate. I don't want to go halfway there. To me, I'd rather tear them down and build something that's neat and clean and looked good than go halfway into saving these. We'll either go all the way to saving these or not. Because I was down there Thursday evening. I was down there for dinner and went through this area afterwards, and my goodness, it is just really unsightly. And we've spent way too much money on this district to not require that to be the case.
Chrissy, this is where the conversation with the group happens, because you're really talking about a historic preservation covenant that you make, the contract that the city makes with whoever were to purchase them. All of that is laid out, every bit of it, a timeline, the architectural details, what is intended to be happening to them, how much of it can be renovated, how you renovate it. All of that would guarantee that you would get the outcome that you want. And the covenant would last, would stay with the deed. It would last in perpetuity. So you couldn't have someone buy that house and then come back to fix that up and come back to the ARB and say, you know what, it's not big enough for me, and I want to tear it down because it's not current. It would be a covenant that describes exactly the intent of having these homes being preserved and maintained and restored to a level that we believe is of the best value to the city on that street. So I agree with you, but I think jumping to an RFP too quickly without having that conversation at that task level would be a mistake.
And I would just say, I'm going to disagree with you this much, Jane. I don't do it very often because you're usually pretty right, is I am less concerned about them being affordable than I am about them being right.
Well, then this is a conversation I have to ask this question. If we have about, I don't know, Dana, you're going to have to verify this for me, and this is public information, and I'm sure people are watching. If we paid 1.9 million for all of this, is that about what we paid? What was the cost?
1.6, I believe, wasn't it?
Okay. Is it 1.6? Okay. And we've gotten some money from Warpsy for the park. So are we at about?
Not yet, we haven't.
Not
We
yet,
hope to.
let's say we get it. So what are we out of pocket on the houses? About a million?
Was I right? 1.6 or 1.9? I thought it was 1.6.
195.
195. Okay.
Okay.
So sorry about that. 195. I'm already deducting the 300,000 we're hoping to get from Warpsy. So the 195.
So
I think. Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, let's say we're out of pocket 1.2. We got 6 houses. That's 200, and they're not all worth the same. So I'm just averaging them out.
Or take the parkland out. We got a big chunk of parkland there too. So you got to take
Right,
the parkland
I'm
out. We're
taking it out.
probably 900 on the houses.
All right, 900, but I mean, let's just say a million. And you got 6 of them. So you're under 200,000. We all know what the property in historic, we know what the land alone is. So I can tell you for a fact that you're going to have so many people interested in these properties because the land alone is worth under 200. So even though they're small parcels. So I do think that we have to take our time to make sure that we give opportunities for all these people that are going to come and want to restore them and live in these as individual properties. They're just a really good investment. So, I think that we have to take a little bit of time to make sure that we do the right thing for everybody, the city, and because you can make money on this. Do you want to make money on this?
Yeah.
I don't think
Well,
that's what the city wants.
I think the city, you want to at least try to recover what you've got in it. But
Yeah.
but I would also suggest that sometimes too much information in an RFP process is too much information. And sometimes you want it to be a little bit vague to see what you can get creatively. So if you want to emphasize, I'm not going to tell you how to do it. That's why we're getting a committee. But to talk about preservation, to talk about you got to live there. We could talk to legal. The advisory committee talk to legal about how do you deed restrict it, and that's a conversation you can have. I would always encourage you to be a little bit open-minded in the approach. Let people use their creativity on how to achieve this, because there's lots of, Andy will know, and I've done one myself in German Village. I know what it's like. There's a lot of different ways to approach cost when it comes to this kind of thing, and let people be creative about it. And then they can bid, if you will. They'll propose their idea, but they'll also, with that, incorporate a bid on what, and you could set a minimum bid. Say, don't even pitch if you're not going to spend at least X on this for this house at X address. That's the starting floor, and then you see where you go from there. So it's going to be what you should guarantee probably that you'll get at least that money back as the floor, and then see where it goes from there, and then go off of that. But that's for the committee to discuss and bring back to council an RFP design. But I think you can get generally to where y'all want to get to. And I think likewise through this discussion, I would recommend that you have a little bit of dialogue about, and we will leverage staff. I'm sure Megan will bring with her some experts like a Brad and Jenny with zoning and that sort of thing. But also, I think Matt Ehrman would probably at some point check in because of the parkland that's going in. There's a historic stone wall along North Riverview Street. There's those kind of things that will need to be taken into consideration. Maybe engineering needs to talk about the street itself and the curb lines and things like that. So there's other things to be considered as well by the city as this whole package. So, but that's all discussion. I think this advisory would really be helpful for this advisory committee to come together and talk about.
So I would like you have enough information to turn it over to the committee.
I had a quick question for Megan about, you mentioned, I think it's the red house. I'll call it the red house. I can't remember that is on the east side of the road.
Yes.
Because that is zoned public use.
Yes.
What are the limitations there on that as a residence versus?
Actually, Jenny can speak to the specifics of that zoning.
So it's currently used as residential, so it could remain so if you so chose. It could remain residential as it exists, but the historic public does allow for civic uses, so community garden, educational facility, if you will, library, museum type, again, not to the scale I think that we all think of, but you could use it for some of those more civic minded uses. There are minimal commercial uses there, and then some accessory uses as well.
So I think that gets back to the creativity thing that Dana mentioned, that on that particular unit, it could be interesting to see I think it was a potter shop. Someone told me once upon a time before it became a residential. I don't know if if that's lore or if that's in fact true. But I think that particular property and where it's positioned has some flexibility. I just wanted to mention, we talked about them all being residential homes and established that way. I think there may be some flexibility with that one, given one, its location, its history, et cetera, so forth, that could be interesting. And I think the others as residential make a lot of sense. I don't know, I might be interested in what are the options for use along that particular piece of property.
Vice Mayor DeRosa, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think the red house, like we all call it, poses a little bit of a challenge because it is on that public property. You want that to be parkland. If it was going to be residential, how do you parse off any land with it? If you do it all, or do you keep it some sort of public type use? So maybe the committee could think about that a little bit as part of their recommendations on what could happen with that red house. Because I think it would be, I don't want to use, well, somewhat problematic or challenging. Let me use that word, challenging, to have a single family resident there on top of the parkland, and then what do you do behind it and around it, and you know what I mean, with the land. So that could be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and it's an interesting location too, right where it is, that some interesting things could happen there. So there's an example, as you said, about having some flexibility and not putting too many constraints on everything out of the get-go. That could be interesting.
And if you go on the walkthrough when I schedule it in a couple of weeks, I think you will find that structure pretty interesting, how it's built into the hillside.
That's also one of the oldest structures. I think it was a Potter's, at least I think Tom Holton said that has quite a bit of history to it. And I think it'd make a great public use for some, especially as an entrance to the parkland. I think that has a lot of potential. I agree.
Yeah, I look forward to it, the walkthrough. Thank you, Megan, for all your work and staff on this. I think it's very nice that we have all of these options before us, isn't it? Look at all the conversation about options. I think that's great. Thank you.
Okay, well, I thank you so much for that conversation. I think we've got the direction we need, and we'll form the advisory committee if that's a direction that council's amenable to, and we'll start pulling that together.
I think so. I think I heard from everyone, or didn't hear anything to the contrary. So, okay, well, that was the last item on our agenda, I believe. Dana, do you have anything else you need from us this evening, or?
No, great discussion tonight. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it, and we'll get after it here. Thank you for all the good direction.
Well, appreciate all three of the presentations were really good tonight. And I felt like it was for a Zoom meeting, it was the highest quality conversation we've had to date. So I'm really appreciative of the way staff led it and the clarity of the documents and so on and so forth. So thanks to everyone that participated tonight, and have a wonderful evening, all.
Thanks.
Bye.